Okay. Good day, everyone. My name is Irfan Mangera, and I'll be the director today for today's youth rally. We commemorate Youth Day as a special moment in time. And I think importantly to recognize that it's not just this token day where we, just remember the youth of 1976 and leave it at that. I think for us in the present day is to say, okay, we're learning from them some lessons and we need to enact these lessons. We need to put it into practice and we need to see how do we take forward the struggles today. The struggles were quite different back in the day, and the struggles today are also so vast and so wide ranging that we have to find ways in which to deal with them. So without wasting any more time, I'd like to welcome you all. It's so great to see so many young people taking their time out on such a cold day, one of the coldest days this winter, and joining us for this youth rally. It's important that we link up with one another because ultimately the struggle isn't going to be fought individually. It's a united struggle as all young people will be fighting. Today we have a really packed program, and I'd like to firstly introduce our speakers that we have with us, who have been working quite hard in different fields of work and have a lot of experience in different organizations. So the first speaker we have is Mateo Brody, who's a comrade of mine. He was on the WITS SRC, and he currently works at Section 27 as a researcher. So welcome, Mateo.
Thank you, Irfan.
Thank you so much. We have next Courtney Morgan. Courtney Morgan is a climate justice activist. She's been working super hard, especially in this lockdown. Just this morning, they had it was like what 6-7 hours worth of the climate justice charter discussions around how to take forward the issues around that. And we welcome you, Courtney. Good to have you back.
Thanks, Irfan.
Next up, we have Busisiwe Nkosi, our very own anti-racism manager at the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. Busi has been also working quite hard, especially this week, with a rise of racist incidences during the lockdown, and even with the Black Lives Matter movement taking so much recognition, gaining so much recognition across the globe. Welcome, Busisiwe Nkosi.
Morning, and thanks for having me on today.
It's very far from morning. I think it looks like morning outside.
Oh,
but,
gosh.
Good
It's
afternoon.
the weather.
Yeah, it is the weather. It is the weather. Crystal, we welcome you next. Crystal is the project lead at Youth Capital, a really amazing organization that I started following, I think, from last year or so, and focusing lots of attention on unemployment, and just recently also submitting to the department for the youth policy. So welcome, Crystal, and good to have you with us, Crystal.
Thanks so much, and really excited to be here with everybody today.
Awesome. We have next Bayanda. Bayanda is a content creator at Equal Education. Really excited to have you. I also started following you very recently, but I was going through your page and your feed, and it's just amazing and remarkable the work you've been doing and being a voice for young people, especially with the current crisis where lots of people have been marginalized. Having said that, it's also Pride Month, and we've seen a lot of a rise in, I'd say, homophobia and all sorts of discriminatory behavior. And it was great to see some of how you responded to that. So welcome, Bayanda.
Thank you so much.
Awesome, lovely to have you. We have next Honorable Fasiha. Fasiha is the youngest MPL in the Gauteng Provincial Legislature, and she actually just finished on an interview and joined us now. Welcome, Fasiha. You have been you will probably hear a lot more from what you're saying, what you'll be saying soon. But a comrade in arms who's worked thoroughly at WITS University on student issues in a number of student and youth organizations. It's great to have you here on this panel as well.
Thanks, Irfan, and thanks to AKF Youth for giving us all the opportunity to be here today.
Of course. It's always lovely to share spaces with such amazing young people. Sorry, it's cold. I blame it on the cold. Last but not least, we have Dr. Shakira Chunara, one of my faves, who's been with me, who's been helping me run this youth sessions online for the last, I think 2 months now. Just phenomenal, the content, the speaking. She's experienced as much as everyone else here in so many different fields of work, a public health researcher, and someone, a fierce anti-racist activist. So welcome, Shakira, well, Dr. Shakira. It's so great to have you.
Protocol observed, Irfan, and super high five to everyone listening in. And happy Youth Day right up front, I guess.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we were gonna have a one of the stalwarts from the 1976 uprising. Unfortunately, he can't join us today, but we do hope that we'll get a snippet from him that we can post on our social media pages a bit later or even in this week. And remember, it is still Youth Month, so we will be carrying out a lot. We would like to hear a lot more from you guys as young people. And I think it's important that we welcome everybody else here in the session. There's a number of young people here, and it's so awesome to see you all. Some familiar faces, and a big welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us. The way we're gonna do this, we have a short video clip that we're gonna be playing just in remembrance of 1976, and then some reflections from our speakers on 1976. And then we're gonna move on into a lot more constructive discussion on what is our struggles today and how do we take forward those struggles. I think also it's important to recognize and highlight that this is the 40th anniversary of the school boycotts in the 1980s. And that's where hundreds and thousands of young people boycotted school. And, it started in the Cape and moved on throughout the country. But it was a significant moment where young people beyond 1976 were saying, we have to do something about the struggles. We have to do something about our situation. So remember, it's also the 40th anniversary of that school's boycott. Now, without wasting any more time, here's the video clip that I'd like to play.
In the Valley of Death, rode the 600. This is an extract from Tennyson's Charge of the Light Brigade. It's a poem that Tsietsi Mashinini used on the morning of 16 June 1976 as he galvanized hundreds of students out of Morris Isaacson High School on a route that this country will never forget.
Tsietsi gave me what I never thought I would have. Tsietsi gave me freedom. Tsietsi gave me the ability to be conscious. Tsietsi gave me the ability to find solace where it doesn't exist.
40 years on, a monument stands honoring Mashinini, a pivotal face of a fearless generation. D. Mashinini, Tsietsi's younger brother, was 15 years old when revolt hit Soweto streets.
Tsietsi, very close to June 16, virtually began to disappear from home. Somebody used to knock 3 times, middle of the night, and I didn't know who this guy was. And he used to wake up Tsietsi every 3rd or 4th night of the week. And he would knock at the window, and Tsietsi would wake up and go, and they would never come back again. And later it turns out that was Steve Biko. So there was that working together between Tsietsi, Steve Biko, and a lot of, BCM leaders around the time.
Mashinini had been secretly organizing a march against Afrikaans as the main language of instruction.
We never heard what is biology in Afrikaans, what is arithmetic in Afrikaans, what is biblical studies in Afrikaans. We never heard of those words. But as of today, there is no plan that says as of in the next 3 years, as of today, it's called a Rekkenkende. It's called that and that and that, and that is no longer called what you grew up knowing. So that big barrier arrives so sudden that going to school is becoming a big problem again.
While the protest was intended to be peaceful, it ended in tragedy as police, without warning, opened fire on the students. As Dee remembers his brother, he recalls the mayhem of the day.
It was like a war. They were shooting live bullets, we were picking dead bodies. We were all afraid, but we wanted to fight on.
One of those bodies was Hector Peterson's. He was one of those killed on that day. The 12-year-old fell right outside Manasseh Sefase's home.
It was for the first time seeing such a young man in blood, especially shot. We were not used to such things. So I cried, and I could imagine how was the sister who was running alongside him with Mbuso. She was screaming and asking for help,
Moments before this, Sefase had been told that another student, Hastings Ndlovu, had been killed.
He was a close friend of mine. I don't remember how I reacted, but I felt out of this world, and I was driven by anger. So I joined those who were angry, especially those who saw Hector Peterson in blood, Mind you, if we had guns that day, we would be talking something else. We were only fighting with stones and used dustbin lids as a shield against bullets.
He says they then went on the attack.
Thereafter, then there was war. Anything that was associated with the regime, be it beer halls, be it their vehicles and everything, was attacked and banned.
The protests marked a turning point in the fight for liberation, and it was clear that young people were willing to do whatever was necessary to fight oppression.
When the newspapers of the evening and the next day began to show photographs of Tsietsi and his leadership of the entire student movement, it was not only a shock to the outside world and the outside community, it was a shock to his father and to his mother too. My son, what have you just done? So it is on fire. Everywhere in Soweto there are police, there are dogs, there are soldiers, there's guns, there's takers. What have you done?
Okay. 60-year-old Tukuluho Lekwadi was also in the crowd.
You make me feeling very emotional to talk about 76 especially.
Like Mashinini, his leader, being part of the protest made him a wanted man.
The following day, I was on the paper and I was told, don't go home. They'll be looking for you. Your picture is clearly. I came home, I slept. My father was very strict. The following day I left. I never slept home from that day. I left home.
He spent years evading arrest, moving from country to country across the continent. Choosing not to follow any particular party meant he had little protection. And while pictures of Lekwadi grace the history books, he prefers to keep a low profile.
I'm okay where I am. I trained myself to accept the situation and live with it and enjoy it. Out of all this, where one person is present, say, but bro, You were supposed to be driving an X5. I say, I'm working with my feet. And I'm enjoying that. The only thing that makes me feel sad is about the life that a black person is living in South Africa. That's what makes me feel sad. That's the only thing. Because nothing has changed much. The people are still being crowded in a train like my mother used to do and my father. So I don't think that there's much that has changed. In fact, we've got two classes now in South Africa. Those who can afford and those who cannot afford.
He believes that without investing in young people, the country will struggle to move forward.
Is our government putting enough effort to upgrade the future of a young black child? It hurts me. I don't have power. I don't want to be in politics. Because in politics, dog eats a dog. I don't want to be aligned to any movement. But as a parent today, I'm looking at my neighbor's child. I'm looking at young girls passing here. Young men here who you can see that these people are futureless.
He says the promise of 1976 will only be realized if there is equal education and opportunity.
On the 16th of June, I always pray and thank God. For keeping me alive until today. I think I celebrate that day more than my birthday. Because most of the people that I was with, especially that I was with, they're dead.
Tsitsi died in exile in 1990. Mashinini believes that young people who strive to continuously empower themselves are continuing the legacy of his generation.
I don't think we're a price tag. I don't think at a personal level we hope to expect it for any rewards. When I walk up Chris Arnett Drive, what used to be Old Police Room, towards the UJ campus of Soweto, I see thousands of black students free, walking from education institution without any hindrance to education. That would have made Tsitsi smile. Today, I see students hashtagging a revolution again. Children who are saying, this time we know. We know our rights. We know the value of education. We know. And today we can determine our own future without being told by anybody. That would have made Tsitsi smile.
The revolution has no beginning and has no end. We are part of the revolution. And then we don't know when is it going to end. But I want to believe that once you are in a revolution, you are in forever.
The resounding message from all three men is that the struggle will continue until all who live in South Africa are equal. Kathy Mutlatlana, Johannesburg.
Okay, a lot to reflect about, a lot has been said. And I think the linkage between...
Your business idea needs a website? So go to Wix.com.
Wow.
I know what you're thinking.
Apologies for that. Yeah, as I was saying, a lot has been said, a lot has been done, but where do we link the struggle? How do we take the reflections and lessons from the past and bring it forward? The way they ended this last video clip was important to me because it also shown that they recognize that young people today are or do have the ability to take forward the revolution, to take forward the struggle. We've seen it with the Fees Must Fall movement, Roads Must Fall, and so on. And we continue to see it on the day-to-day where young people are doing phenomenal work. And the narrative that young people are just lazy and inadequate should come to an end. But we are the ones who have to write that history. We are the ones who have to ensure that that history is written from our voices and with our voices. So let's hear what some of our young panelists have to say. First, I'd like to call upon Comrade Mateo. The reason why I'm doing this also is because you were there during the Fees Must Fall movement. You are leading at the SRC level and at student level as a key voice, but also what is it you do currently, and how could we possibly take forward our struggles as young people?
Thank you, Comrade Irfan. I think just to reflect on this video, what a moving video. And as you correctly say, I think the 76 generation blew this myth wide open that the youth is it's lost and it's inactive. This was a generation that was politically conscious, that saw the injustice that was happening right before their eyes and mobilized and organized, even under very difficult conditions, managed to mobilize and organize and to get their message across. But it also pains me. Well, just to go back to that, I think what I also appreciate for that is that I realize the privilege that we have the freedoms of expression, freedom of the right to protest. So one of the people that spoke on the video said that the revolution has no beginning and no end. And I think a lot of the time we tend to separate what we do from the past, and it's all, as you see, it's all co-joined. And so we appreciate the freedoms that we have today as a result of the sacrifices that generations like the generations of 76 made. But it also pains me, and a lot of the people that spoke on that video spoke about how unequal the education system still remains, how you still need to, it's still the wealthy, largely by and large, that still have access to a good education. Those that are able to sort of access private institutions, or those that are lucky enough to be located in suburbs or schools that are well resourced historically. And so there's been very little transformation of the education system, which pains me, seeing the sacrifices that were made by the 76 generation. But also, I think something that stuck out for me, and it's something that continues to the present day, is police brutality. In that video, the 76 generation was a generation that was largely peaceful and really wanted to conduct a peaceful demonstration, and were met with live ammunition. We fast forward to today, and we see, the military and the police still exercising unnecessary amounts of force on civilians. The Fees Must Fall movement is one such example, where we saw how students were brutalized unnecessarily in many cases. And recently we've also had the case of Collins Khoza and many others who have been killed by the military and the police. And so, in as much as there's been progress, we still are plagued with many of the same issues that we've inherited from our past.
No, absolutely. And it was just a week or two ago that we held a very symbolic picket at the Hector Peterson Memorial site, where we reflected on the brutality that they faced then and saying, what's changed now? In fact, I was quite hopeful in the beginning of the lockdown, where the president sent off the army to say, you know, are you there to protect the people? You're there to make sure that you safeguard the people. And you've seen increased level of brutality and excessive use of force, which really shouldn't be the case. So we did speak to Nompendula, in fact, on that day, and she also reflected on what should change. Is it a policy issue? Is it the issue of how our forces are trained and so on? So I do agree with you there, and I thank you for that contribution. Dr. Shakira, you also were speaking through to some of the racism incidences that have happened. You also have been quite busy this whole lockdown as a public health researcher. Tell us some of your reflections and how and what is it we can do about it. Sound. Okay, let's see. Unmute. Okay.
Perfect. You can hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Sorry, Irfan, I don't know what happened. I'm getting your techno skills on youth day, I suppose. Can you repeat the question for me?
So, I mean, you've been quite busy this whole lockdown because this is a huge public health crisis, but also in the recent times about speaking through about issues of racism and brutality and so on. So your reflections perhaps from the youth of 1976 and then taking it into what you've currently been doing.
Yeah, so I mean, again, it's great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the segment where we listen from the young people themselves. Irfan and everyone listening in, you know, I'm usually a very cynical person, and today I woke up and I promised myself that I'm not going to be cynical. So I'm trying very hard here. And one of the reasons I'm saying this is because I think in the times that we live in, but also in the youth space that we are, things are so disappointing. Things really dampen our spirits. I've been speaking out a lot on tokenism and what it means to be in the African Union. And that has dampened my spirit because I went into the position with so much of hope and so much of change that I wanted to bring on the continent. So when I was thinking about my intervention today, and I'll jump right into it, if I look up, please forgive me, because I really want to reflect on the Mandela sellout debate, or the generation of Mandela, Kathrada, Sisulu being known as the sellouts. And like the previous speaker said, our revolutions are not really delinked in some way. And so being in the foundation, I have a few memories which stood out. And as I say goodbye to my youth, being 30 years old, I want to talk about these memories that I've carried through the past 10 years or so. And I think the importance of history in shaping us. One of my favorites, and you know, I'm going to look down and read now and then, and I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites, but I think when you sit down and you read Uncle Kathy's book, Memoirs, there's a quote that just catches you and it leaves you so cold. And he talks about a woman who was arrested and she had to strip naked in front of police officers. Her fallopian tubes were filled with water, and they put rats into her vagina as well and into her other body parts. So you know, it hits you. And we were that morning at Constitutional Hill, where we heard these stories of how women were tortured in the women's jail. And that really stuck with me. The other thing that stuck with me is when you read different books of Uncle Kathy, but also when we were lucky to go to Robben Island with him, he talked about how he described Robben Island as being cold. The day they got there, and it's quite ironic today, we're sitting here talking about it, but the day they got there to Robben Island, he said it was cold. They were given cold showers. They weren't given towels. And I think sometimes us as young people forget what this democracy has meant. Some of my other favorite memories were listening to Uncle Shirish Nanabai and the late Shirish Nanabai. And he came with us to Robben Island. And I can never forget how he was such a simple man. He brought all his artifacts, which were probably so expensive or worth so much in the little Checkers packet. And he was taking out his spoon and he was showing us. But I'll end off by saying, you know, the one memory that I really just can't get out of my mind is those little cells of Della, Kathrada, Sisulu, the story of Uncle Kathy telling us how Walter Sisulu had pain when he looked at his family album, how Uncle Shirish showed us that they slept on mattresses which were about this thick, you know, even in the very, very cold. So I want to end up today talking about that. And I know it's a very controversial issue, and many young people think that we were sold out. But I want to sit here and argue that actually these leaders are very rare in the world. They had vision, they had foresight, they thought about what forgiveness will mean. And working on the African continent, I can tell you now, yes, we can't eat freedom, but freedom does mean that we're able to speak freely, we're able to be in the media, we're able to be activists. Whereas if you're sitting in Uganda or any other country, you will be arrested like this for standing up against the state. So I just want to end up there, but appreciation for those of the 1976 generation and those who really gave so much for us. And I think we've forgotten it as young people.
Oh, for sure. Thank you so much for that contribution. Courtney, you also have, or you come from a family that has a history of fighting from the apartheid struggle, and you have carried on your own and created your own legacy of fighting for things you believe in. Perhaps share some reflections, not just of the video, but of the youth of that time and what does it mean to you? And then take us forward into some of the issues you're dealing with today.
Sure. Thanks, Irfan. So definitely, I think the biggest thing that the generation of 76 gave us was the foundation, you know, the foundation for youth activism and to really show how much youth can do in this country. I don't think a lot of countries have that kind of rich history and that kind of foundation for youth to have such a voice. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned my family. It really surprised me when I got into spaces where people were talking about just being introduced to the fact that racism still exists, or just being introduced to the Palestinian issue, when these are things I grew up with. And these are, you know, all of the people that Shakira just mentioned, you know, I grew up around seeing these people and you know, knowing that these people directly with their own hearts, with their own souls, fought for our freedom. And that's also, you know, such a privilege for us. Our generation, I don't think we realize that being the generation straight after liberation, we have this privilege of interacting individually, personally with those who fought for our freedom. I remember I was at a school event and we went to Lily's Leaf. And, you know, my entire grade was there and it was interesting. And just so happened that AKF was also doing a tour on that day. And Uncle Kathy was there. And I was like, hey guys, that's Uncle Kathy. And they were like, you mean Ahmed Kathrada? You mean? And I was like, yes, we can go speak to him. Let's introduce. And people were floored that was a thing, that we could actually interact with these people that we read about in our history books. So I think, first of all, that's really amazing. But also secondly, in terms of the video, I mean, that was really powerful. And I like the fact that it didn't romanticize June 16th, because, you know, June 16th was not just this one day that youth decided, okay, we're going to walk out and we're going to do this. It came from months of planning, months of anger, years of anger. And I think that's something that we need to be using. Youth then were angry and they used it to make a change. Youth today are just as angry, and we need to be, it's not a bad emotion, but we need to be able to use it to actually make change, you know. In terms of what I'm doing, I am in the climate justice space, which for me, I think is our generational fight. I think that every generation has their fight. The previous one was liberation. Our struggle today is for a just society, but we are also fighting against the clock. We're fighting against climate change that really does, and not in a sense being dramatic, but really does pose an existential threat to human beings. So I think, yeah, I mean, I can speak more. I don't want to take too much time, but yeah, that's what I am currently working on, a climate justice charter for South Africa, something similar to the Freedom Charter, but that outlines kind of principles and goals and alternatives to really mitigate the climate crisis, but at the same time achieve social justice through that. So yeah.
I think perhaps we'll probably, in the session where we have question and answers and comments, people will probably raise some of the concerns with you around the climate justice issues. And I think you also will have a chance to respond soon again. Bayanda, perhaps you can also come in here. Courtney spoke about anger and how it's important for us as young people to channel that anger in relation to how youth of 1976 did that. So how could we possibly do that in the present day?
Thank you so much. It's funny how the first thing that when I watched the video, I wrote the psychological impact that June 16 and history per se has on the present generation. And I think we often forget to talk about mental health and to talk about the impact that young people are facing today. And that's the way they express themselves in social platforms, in spaces. I don't per se feel they have forgotten where they're coming from, but I think the burden of having to be born and raised under such a heavy history, it on its own, it is a psychological impact on youth. So I'm going to start with there, that using that then to channel your own struggle and to channel youth struggle today is very important. First of all, I think for me, there's no single struggle. I think that the more youth realize that we need to view every struggle as an intersectional struggle, it's very important. So we can all talk about education, we can all talk about gender-based violence, as long as we don't see a person in an intersectional lens, we will never understand what we're fighting for, because everyone is trying to pull aside, and that's my problem today with our own issues. We all need to realize that one comes with different forms, right? I come as a Black, gay man, approaching an unjust education system, and so on and so on and so on. That's the youth of South Africa today. They're not just facing one struggle, they're facing so many different struggles. And to channel your anger towards that, it's very difficult, because we need to talk about how does intersectionality looks like, and what does it mean to be an intersectional activist, and channel your anger into the right channel. So when I saw the video, I saw a lot of psychological impact that is still embedded to our older generation, into our current generation, and we just need to find a way to use that in a correct manner. So I just wanted to say that that's why people are developing environmental charters. That's why Equal Education is developing an education charter today, to say that what is the ideal education that we're all looking for, all of us we want, and what do we see, and to use that charter then to guide us through of how does that look like. So I think, just to stop there, just to say that the youth is doing something, the youth is speaking, the youth is shouting, the youth is on the street. I think we're all panicking towards the right way.
Thank you so much. I do agree with you. I think it in part what this rally is looking at is how we broaden the intersections, how we say this is links to this, and this is why as a collective we need to deal with the situation at hand. And I think a lot of it, like you mentioned, education is dealing with issues around education. You have COPAC and others dealing with justice, climate justice. We also have Crystal here who has been doing work around unemployment and issues of unemployment. So perhaps you can also speak into that, Crystal, as a young person, the project lead of this organization, how do you as young people organize towards the issues that you're trying to deal with?
Thanks, Irfan. I think it's good to I agree with a lot of what has been said already. The struggles of young people continue today, and I think at Youth Capital that's why we exist. So we're quite a new organization. I know when you introduced us, you said you started following us this year. We've been around for just over 2 years. And Youth Capital really exists because we think why this crisis of youth unemployment has persisted for over a decade is because people keep speaking at young people, but not with young people, not taking the time to hear what their experiences are. And I think on days like today, it's good to be reminded of the power of young people, and that young people can change the system, but also that those in power start recognizing that it shouldn't always be on young people. Young people shouldn't have to fight this hard. I think I was really moved in the video where, they spoke about how sad it is to see how unequal access to education still is. And so I think at Youth Capital, we spent a lot of time over the last 2 years traveling across the country, speaking to young people, both in person and on social media, to hear what their lived experiences are. And now, in this youth month, we're really starting to go public with our action plan for youth unemployment. It's a 10-point plan that we think really captures the lived experiences of young people and is supported with data and evidence. And we have a network of Youth Capital influencers who are very busy today. If you see on our social media pages, we're sharing lots of stuff that they're doing. They've also put together a video calling for people to adopt this 10-point plan. Because the power to solve such a big crisis will only come with everybody getting on board with this plan. And so what we're saying at Youth Capital is, here's the plan. We want everybody to get behind, but we want everybody to find their place in the plan. Whether you're a young person, whether you're a person in power, a government official, big business, there's a part of the plan that you can support. And so what we're saying is, this is what we want to showcase what young people are doing. I think everybody on this call knows that young people are hustling and they're doing all the things and they're trying so hard to change the situation, but we need everybody else to come to the party. And so Youth Capital is really trying to fill that space. And we are speaking to 3 focus areas, which I think have been covered a lot. The fact that in 1976, which is decades ago, people died for education, for the right to quality education. And yet today, we hear ministers raving about matric pass rates every January without ever mentioning that half of those who start in grade 1 never make it to matric, and are just the forgotten and the invisible youth who struggle to ever find a job or to thrive as an adult. And those kinds of conversations are the things that we think the country should be listening to and hearing young people on. And so I think on days like today, we're really proud to see young people standing up, but we're also saying that adults need to stop expecting young people to overcome these huge hurdles and these challenges and start playing their part to change the landscape for young South Africans.
Truly. I am in awe at all the work you guys are doing, and I think it's super important because over 50% youth unemployment rate, and it's more than likely going to be growing even further because our economy is already so strained. With the COVID pandemic, we've seen many people losing jobs, and without even having big events and big concerts and so on, you also lose out on, those informal jobs in the informal job sector. So things are becoming a lot more tough. The NGOs as well would also be facing a huge hit by not being able to have the kind of capacity that they'd like to have. I think you spoke at a key point around young people alone shouldn't be doing this. And I think the power dynamic is important to raise. Who holds power? Where is power situated in society? I know one such person who has fought really hard and who is currently in government now, fighting a good fight. Fasia Hassan, maybe you can come through here and speak into how you see your role as a young person, especially as a public representative. And I know you're very passionate about education and unemployment. So how do we deal with this? You getting a seat at the table, how do you push forward here?
Thanks, Irfan. In fact, that was exactly what I wanted to speak to, because a lot of what's already been mentioned, I mean, Chakra spoke about tokenism, we've spoken now about having meaningful engagement. And I think one of the big things for me, I mean, it's just been a year in office, so it's been quite a baptism of fire. But I really want to speak very briefly on 2 or 3 things. The one is around, and it's got something to do with resisting the tokenism that Chakra spoke about, and that is about how we ensure that we're not just a checkbox. Okay, we have young people in the legislature, we have young people in parliament, tick, tick, and about ensuring that we are fundamental part of the decision-making process, but also that our views and our ideas are taken very seriously. So that's something that's been a big focus. But also, and I'm not sure, it might have been Bayanda who spoke about this, around how we need to focus on getting young people voices to the front. So I sit on the Education Portfolio Committee, which deals with basic education. And we've been doing a lot of school visits with the reopening. And one of the things that was quite shocking to me at the beginning when we took office and started this work, because we play oversight over government, was that no one thought to ask the learners what their experiences were or what they felt or what they thought could be possible solutions to the situations that they faced. And it was shocking to me because if you just engage a few young people, you get down to the bottom of the issue very quickly. And also when you ask about solutions and advice, it's profound. So before, I think the entry of young people, they were sitting in the principal's office and thinking, well, okay, great, we're really on the ground here. So even this week, I've had a lot of conversations with young people, particularly in matric in grade 7, who are genuinely very afraid of what's going on. And I think from my experience, they're less afraid for themselves and more afraid for their families. And that fundamentally affects and changes how we engage with young people. So that's one example of what we're doing. But the second thing, and this is also fundamental, and that is around youth unemployment. We know we have an unemployment crisis in the country, but it's particularly acute and particularly, unbelievable at a youth level. What we're seeing now, and the statisticians are very clear, is that independent of education level, you are unlikely to find a meaningful job in your lifetime. And that's not something that any of us can pretend is okay. And it's a huge focus of what we're trying to do in terms of creating policy that centers young people, and not just centers young people. It says, well, what can we do to make the situation more, I don't want to use the word easy, that's not the correct one, but make it more viable for young people, whether that be through skills development, what we now call workforce pathway management, but that's really a fancy way of saying creating the steps to make it easy for somebody to enter into a job. But ultimately, every policy that's coming through, I'm trying my best, and so are other young MPs and MPLs, to ensure that young people are at the center, particularly young Black women.
Indeed. I think you have such a strategic role to play in taking this forward, in taking the struggles forward at that level. I know actually it was in a conversation with yourself and Mateo, who spoke about an experience at Parliament level where they presented some work at Parliament. So maybe let's bring in quickly Mateo here to what is it that you have been doing in relation to taking forward the struggle around education? Because I know you've been working quite hard as a researcher and in that field of work. And I think your engagements with, say, government and other institutions and other NGOs has been, or is a really important one, and one I think a lot of us can learn from. So perhaps you please share with us some of those experiences.
Thanks, Irfan. I think, as has been mentioned by previous speakers, education is such an integral part to today. And there's just one quote I'd like to share that I found as I was preparing for this youth rally. And it's a quote from the Deputy Chief Justice of the Concord, former Deputy Chief Justice of the Concord, Dikgang Moseneke. And he says that apartheid has left us with many scars. it is so that white public schools were hugely better resourced than black schools. They were lavishly treated by the apartheid government, and that is why perhaps the most abiding and debilitating legacy of our past is an unequal distribution of skills and competencies acquired through education. In an unconcealed design, the Constitution ardently demands that this social unevenness be addressed by a radical transformation of society as a whole and of public education in particular. And that touches on a lot of what has been spoken about already. And so, yeah, as you've said, I'm a legal researcher at Section 27 in the Education Rights Program. And yeah, we work towards the realization of the right to basic education. And, you know, the 76 generation struggled for this quality education. And when we entered into this constitutional dispensation, we know that Section 29 guarantees everyone the right to a basic education. But there's still, unfortunately, 26 years into democracy, we know that we still have a largely broken and unequal education system. For instance, we know how overcrowded our township schools are, and we know how poor and dilapidated the infrastructure is in our rural schools. And so, you know, we also know that some schools also make use of pit toilets, unimproved pit toilets. And it was a 5-year-old learner, Michael Komape, and this is a case that Section 27 worked on extensively. And the 5-year-old learner, Michael Komape, who was only on, if I'm not mistaken, his second or his first day at school, went to the bathroom, which is something that, you know, is a normal part of our day, just going to the bathroom. But the toilet at his school was a pit toilet, and he never returned from the toilet. He drowned in the pit toilet and drowned in human waste. And so these are just examples of how broken our education system is 44 years after the 76 uprising, 26 years into democracy. And, you know, there have been great successes by organizations such as Section 27, Equal Education Law Center, in fighting for this right to basic education and improving our education system, and primarily using the law. I think something that I want to share is that, you know, the law can only go, and I speak as a legal researcher, so I'll share from that perspective. The law can only go to a certain extent. One, we know that, you know, legal processes take quite a long time. For instance, there's a case, the Pridwin case, which was heard over a year ago, and we're only hearing that judgment on that matter is going to be delivered tomorrow. So it's quite long, it's quite expensive. We know that even when you do get a court order, government officials don't implement what is ordered or what is in the judgment of a court. And so, you know, and as much as law and the Constitution and the rights contained therein are important, what we see is that government officials in many instances are very responsive rather to social movements and to advocacy. I think Fees Must Fall, the Fees Must Fall movement is one such example where we saw a massive mobilization campaign and a massive movement that prompted government to take action in a very short space of time. And so, yeah, the point really that I'm trying to make is that in as much as there are those of us that are working within law, we need to also, and this is where the youth broadly also takes part, is that we need advocacy campaigns. We need the youth to be active, be it on social media, be it in sort of organizing marches, protests, writing to bodies that Honorable Fasia sits in, the legislature, provincial legislature, and the National Assembly. So we need to be making use of these advocacy campaigns if we want to actually see our education system improve greatly. But I think even with that, you asked about that, you referred to that conversation that we had, Irfan, about presenting in the portfolio committee. So we presented last year in the education parliamentary portfolio committee on basic education, and we had done a report on the state of education in Limpopo. Now, what was disappointing for me, even on that level, is that we had young members of the portfolio committee that made up that portfolio committee. And when we presented, it was very harsh, the response that we received. For instance, some of the young members of the portfolio committee would say, you're funded by third force agents that want to see the destruction of the government. And so I think to add on to what Fasiha was saying, and I think it was Shakira that spoke about tokenism, we also need to ensure that, in as much as we have youth representation, the quality of that representation needs to be one that also pleases us as the youth. And Honorable Fasiha, the likes of Nompendulo, Puyani, there's a whole list of them that are doing a very good job, but we need to be aware of having people that are just put in there in those positions that don't add quality and move our struggles forward.
Thank you so much, Mateo. I think you've given us a lot to think about, particularly raising issues around how deeply unequal the systems are. And I think here I'd like to bring in Busisiwe Nkosi, who works at the Kathrada Foundation, just to also touch base on how these issues affect us at that level, but also along racial lines, considering that we've come through democracy now and we're still fighting a struggle, but that struggle is still very intertwined and very entrenched in a racial dynamic, it's constructed in a racial way. Largely, obviously, looking at spatial planning, we have, there's different policies now that are out, but you have been experiencing and witnessing various cases around racism. And you also, like Shakira, have experienced or have witnessed Uncle Kathy, have spent time with them, worked with young people. How would you put forward what is it you're doing, and why is it important that you carry that as almost a legacy of those that have come before us?
Afternoon once again. I think listening to all the speakers has just been incredible in just seeing how all the issues that are faced by young people are interlinked in one way or another. So you made us watch that video of the march, and it was raw. And as another speaker said, that we need to look at the mental health aspect of it. Because as young people today, we need to realize that some of the baggage that we carry is from that past, and our parents as well relaying these stories has a huge impact on us. But I think just coming into the work that we do at the foundation, one cannot also kind of like ignore the links between racism, poverty, and inequality. I think we one of the most unequal countries currently, and that alone just shows you that even though we are in democracy, the systemic racism that is entrenched is so far deep-seated that it needs young people's voices, but it also needs action. I think in the past few weeks, it has been lovely seeing young people going onto social media, speaking about their own experiences within schools. But with that, we as young people need to be having at least some sort of solutions to the racism and inequalities that exist within schools, but also in our workplaces. We need to look at what are these issues that are taking place, but what is it that we do as society, and where do young people come in? Young people need to be questioning, young people should be out on the street, but at the same time, young people should not allow themselves to be boxed, which is something that happens more frequently than we can admit. In our workplaces, we put into boxes. In our schools, we put into boxes. In our communities, we put into boxes. But also people are just afraid of having those conversations, and those are the chains that we should be breaking as young people today. So just like the youth at that time who fought against all these inequalities, we also need to start taking a stand and fighting against the inequalities that face us today. But we shouldn't put them as individual challenges. We should be linking all our struggles together and standing up against those struggles. I think As young people, we don't realize the voice and the opportunities that we have. Like at that time, there was no social media, there was no emailing, etc. We need to use the tools that we have to fight the inequality that exists, but also the racism. Yeah, I think I'll stop there for now.
No, you've left quite a number of points, like all the other speakers here today. And I think importantly, raising the issue that you've been inspired by young people who have taken to social media, who've in not ordinary forms, in ways where, you know, you left thinking, wow, I would never have expected this from someone who you perhaps follow since school or wherever, and all of a sudden, you know, they're very vocal about you know, issues of inequality and so on, but not just at a face value level. They have serious content. And that's the important bit of today as well, is to say, where are these young people? How do we take their voices and empower them? And how do we channel these into a more constructive avenue of work? And I think a lot of the time, many of the speakers have mentioned that it's about making sure that these voices are heard. It's making sure that we take a collective viewpoint. There's intersections in all of it. So I'm going to take this opportunity to invite the young people listening in who are part of this Zoom session, as well as those on Facebook, because I have seen a few comments on Facebook as well. So if you are watching on Facebook, share and ask us any questions. But if you are here as well, you can use the feature by raising your hand, and any of the panelists are here to respond to you or comment, and we can take forward the discussion from there. I know I've already seen in the chat session we have Nathan who's also put forward some questions. So I don't know if any of the speakers are interested in answering that one. But while you are reading that, Annalisa, over to you. Annalisa, unmute yourself. Okay, there's it. I can hear you now. Go for it.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to ask, like, how can the government, we ensure as young people that the education system is equal? Because where I stay, it's in Port St. John's, and the high school starts at grade 10. But since the government said the students that should return are those who are doing grade 7, so this is not even effective, because our exiters here are grade 9s and they are staying at home. So what can be done in order to reach out to the government and speak about those issues? Because their researchers only give them the information about those who are in models in schools. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. Really impactful. Perhaps Equal Education or Mateo, you wanna address that question? Maybe let me take 3 questions first, and then we can respond as after that. So any other questions? There's a raise hand feature that you can use in the session, or you could just like wave a hand that I can try to see you, any of you guys. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I'm going to give it over to you, Bayanda, to answer the question.
Thank you so much for that. Look, the issue of reopening of schools has been on the news for quite some while. A lot of people are saying that there was no rethinking, and especially for the poor working class communities and schools, there was no consideration for the situation of overcrowded classroom, for the shortage of teachers and all of these things that had to be put in place. One thing that I can say first is the fact that the issues of hygiene, sanitation and hygiene in schools has been an issue. I think Section 27 has highlighted that with equal education over the past years. The fact that right now saying that people are ready to go to school, we're going to provide tanks, we're going to provide, good hygiene is not a reality. We all know that these two organizations and any other more organization have been fighting for years for just the Minister of Basic Education to meet the minimum norms and standards for school infrastructure of every other school. So I'm not surprised to get a question like that. The fact that, there are deep rural areas that are affected immensely about the decision of reopening of schools, and they're going to continue to be like that. So Equal Education is doing a survey in 5 provinces right now, talk to learners about their own experiences, and these are the experiences that, you know, the basic education minister had to go down and actually hear the experiences of learners, and that survey is going to help to launch online and virtual campaigns, young people saying that, look, this is how we are affected by COVID-19. You didn't consider A, B, and C. And I think that's what young people are starting to do. They're starting to make noise from where they're coming from. And I think in a short way, you can reach out to Section 27, you can reach out to Equal Education on our Facebook platforms and share your experiences. And these experiences, we always share them with the right people. And I'm so happy that you shared your experience, because really reopening of schools is affecting a lot of young people and raising the bar for COVID-19.
I fully agree with you, Bayanda, and I think it's so, it's so sad that so far down the line, basic sanitation in schools is still an issue, and it's actually very painful. And I do agree with a lot with the speakers in saying that, or even rather the video, where it brings tears to my eyes to think that on a daily basis, this is the lived experiences for young people across the country. Courtney, you have something to add?
Yeah, just to add to what Bayanda was saying as well with the equal education issue, a big issue pre-COVID and especially during COVID is the issue of water and access to water. So at COPAC and the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign, that's one of our focuses, is trying to make sure that water is returned to the commons and that we can, everyone has access to it. We've actually developed a tool now where we are trying to track where the communities that still don't have water. We currently have about 79 communities who have loaded their saying that they haven't had water. And the interesting thing is that they're not saying they don't have water now. They're saying that they have not had water for 9 years, for 3 years, for 6 months. So, and in the face of COVID, where they say, just wash your hands and you'll be safe, when 56% of South Africans don't have tapped water into their households, you can't do that. So one of the things that we've had multiple meetings with Equal Education. One of the things that we are working on is also adding a tab to that map that allows for schools. So students can come onto that map and load if their school doesn't have access to water. And what we do with these is we message, we send out open letters to the Minister of Water and Sanitation. And what we're thinking is that the next one will be, one of the prerequisites for schools opening is that they have access to water and that they have access to sanitation, not only during COVID, but beyond COVID. And I think a big thing is making sure that we keep those tanks there, making sure that we actually implement the infrastructure for water in schools. We don't want to get past COVID and then the government comes and says, okay, cool, COVID's done, take back all the tanks. We really need to be looking at the long term now. So yeah, just to add.
Thank you so much for that information. I think, again, to all the young people on this platform and also on Facebook watching, there are tools that are available for you to also access these organizations in trying to address issues like the education one. So Equal Education has some tools and like surveys and that available. Courtney has also indicated the issues around water and sanitation. And if a lot of there's also a food sovereignty survey, if I'm not mistaken, the one mapping out crisis all over the country. Fasiha, you have something to add, and then I want to just spur up things a bit for a second.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. I think I just want to make comment on some of the questions that are coming through in writing around volunteering and work as an individual and work as a collective. I think, especially at a time like this, we're seeing a lot of young people wanting to do something, And we saw that around the access around food security, food parcels, but we're also seeing it now to some extent with Black Lives Matter. And I think my message is that we need to organize as young people. We need more grassroots level organizing, but we also don't want to just stand one person and shout at something, right? We want to direct our efforts in a strategic manner. And also when you are part of a collective, there's I think a much louder voice. But it's not just about the voice. It's about, if you think of a pin, if it's sharper, you're able to actually penetrate through. Whereas, right now we don't necessarily have enough of a coordination, I think, as young people. Even on this call, we're doing incredible things, but how many of us are actually working together to a larger extent? Yes, Courtney mentioned work with equal education, and I'm also, in discussions with Section 27, but maybe, this is something for us to think about. How do we pool resources? How do we pool ideas? And ultimately, how do we ensure that young people in the long run benefit from this kind of cooperation? So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. So you do put forward a critical point there. How do we do this? How do we work together? I know there are institutions. You have the NYDA. You have the platforms like Harambe that deals with specific issues around unemployment. Again, what I found in the last few years of my experience as an activist is, again, vacuums, too many vacuums, and not a lot of collaboration. This kind of engagement is good and constructive, and it brings in the different voices, but then where to from here? I want to ask all the panelists to please look at the chat feature. There are a few questions. I think some are directed to people in particular. So before I move on into the next question, I know Bongi Nkosi, I'll note you as the next question. We have a very interesting guest, a game designer, but someone who has experienced, who has also had interactions with the AKF youth work. She's come through the program, and she's also dealt with racism at different fields, and in particular, a field like game design, which is a really interesting one, not one that many people are aware of. So, Bahia Khan, welcome to you. I see the shock in your face. Welcome to you, and perhaps you can just share, or as a young person, your experiences dealing with issues that exist. I know from issues of, we have gender-based violence to racism and so on. Your comment.
Thank you also for asking me to be here. Am I loud enough? I just want to make sure.
You are.
Okay. Yeah, so like Irfan said, my name is Bahia and I'm from Lens, like Irfan, and I'm a game designer. And I studied at WITS, that's where I studied game design. And it was a very interesting experience. And by interesting, I mean bad. So in like my first few years there, it was really difficult for me because I have this problem where sometimes people who like aren't from Lens or whatever and don't know me, they assume that I'm white until I like start talking. And that happened to me a lot, like in my art degree and stuff. And then when they would like find out, that I'm not white, it would be a very different experience afterwards. And like coming from Lens and stuff, and just, being like a colored person, there's a lot of like stereotypes that get thrown at you. Like people would ask me things like, am I going to stab them? And there was just like a lot of very like ugly, like violent stereotypes that they would associate with us. And especially like of people from Lens, they would know, that we are like a middle, lower income area and make all of these really like ugly comments about it. And also just being in like the game design field, it's predominantly white, predominantly male, and it's very unwelcoming in a lot of areas. But we're doing a lot of work to like bring game design, to more people of color. Especially for me, it's like I want to bring more people of color from third world countries into the field, because I feel like I've traveled a lot because of being a game designer and because of the game that I made, which deals with examining gender-based violence and mental illness. But traveling overseas and seeing Sorry, someone just came in my room. Go, I'm in a call.
Daddy.
I have a lot of family members and I love with them. So anyway, yeah. What was I saying? Oh yeah, I made a game about gender-based violence, and then like I traveled a lot overseas, and just seeing the sort of experiences that people overseas, people of color overseas experience compared to us, it's very different. They don't even think of having internet as a privilege. I only got internet, I think 2 weeks ago. And I did like a degree in digital art. You need internet, you know, to be able to like be a game designer, and also just to be at university. So yeah, the things that I'm saying is a bit like all over the place, but basically right now what a lot of us are doing is using like games to help a lot of people who are going through the worst. We've raised about, I think, over $8 million for Black Lives Matter. So that's like incredible, and we're splitting it to a lot of different organizations like the Bail Fund, and to help like people who are arrested to get out of jail and that sort of thing when they're like incorrectly arrested. And I'm about to launch a campaign to raise funds for people in Yemen. So yeah, we get to do a lot of cool things with it. Not everyone, also you have to be, I think, quite stubborn to like make your mark, you know, in this like CEO industry or whatever, because there's a lot of racism and sexism, so much. Like it's really, really disgusting. And like being Muslim, there's also like the whole like Islamophobic aspect. So fun times all around. Yeah, and if I guess if anyone has any questions about it, you can email me or anything. My email is my name, 27@gmail.com, in case you're like ever interested in going into this field, because we definitely need way more people of color, especially South Africans. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Bahia. It's always fun and interesting listening to you speak and engaging with you. And I will I will share perhaps in the chat feature you could just leave your email there, so people who want to reach out can do that. But you raise critical issues, and I know you are short for time, so if anyone does have questions, you can forward that to her via email. But beyond that, you've heard us speak about how it's, you know, the experiences are so different. There's assumptions, there's biases, but the phenomenal thing is that you can use your skills, your skill set, or the type of field you're working in to your advantage in this kind of work. And by raising so much money in such a short space of time, it shows that it's possible. The possibilities are there. I know in the chat feature, some people, but yeah, thank you so much for joining us. I don't know if you are going to leave, but if you are, thank you so much. It's been great hearing from you.
Thank you.
Anyone, it's always great to have you. There are questions in the chat feature, but there's one specifically to Fasiha that says, it's, you know, the grassroots work is important, and yes, we can create awareness around taking hygiene seriously and so on. But in relation to the current situation where you're seeing or you're hearing corruption being or taking place across government levels, where tenders are given out and that sort of you know, malpractice, whether it's bribery or, you know, tenderpreneurship and so on. How do we, you know, deal with a situation that makes us feel hopeless? Well, I think I summed up the question. I hope I did well. But yeah, Fasiha, perhaps you want to answer that question.
Thanks, Irfan. Yeah, I haven't seen that question in writing, but I'll do my best to answer it. I think the first thing is that we need to take a zero tolerance approach, which is something that is kind of new to the administration that we're in. But it doesn't at all absolve what's happened before and what we know to be the crisis, and what we know to be, I think, the cancer that is corruption. And we know that you know, corruption takes away serious resources in terms of providing services to our people. And I think the person who answered the question, you know, mentioned hygiene and sanitation. So I think there's a few things. The one is that, you know, we have started, or it has been, sort of the NPA has started to be bulked up in the Hawks, and there's these different tribunals now, and even the discussions of special courts that are going to be dealing with it. And we're starting to see a lot more of a change of culture, but it takes a lot of time. And I think there's a big role for us as society to play. And that means continuously being a watchdog, continuously getting information out there, continuously ensuring that, you know, if we hear about something, we're not running away from it. And I think there's another element, right? We have an opportunity as society here to alter what I think is a huge culture of corruption. And I'll give you an example. You know, if someone's stopped by the cops, they're very likely to hand over 50 Rand, 100 Rand, whatever it is, and drive away. And they think it's kind of okay, and it's dissociated from the problem and the crisis in society and in government and in the, you know, public sector. But it's not dissociated. It's part of a culture that we need to change. And it's part of something where we all have to take some amount of agency and say, well, I'm going to stop doing this. I'm not going to allow myself to be a part of this corrupt system, and I'm also going to call it out when I see it. And that's something that we are also trying to put in place here, right, as young people. Now that I'm starting to be more involved in the committee work, I'm also starting to develop what I call a corruption sense, like a spidey sense. When you read documents, when you have the numbers in front of you, you know, there's a big role. Like I said earlier, we play oversight over government. We're not exactly government, but we play oversight over them. And it requires us to be very sharp shooters as well. And that's something that we're pushing across. But media is very important. Chapter 9 institutions are fundamentally important. And us as South Africans, as people, fundamentally important to turning the tide and changing things. Of course, I mean, it goes without saying, but I'll say number one, actually, politicians, public service representatives, public servants, civil servants, but I thought that went without saying. So those were in addition to that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vas. Bongi Nkosi, you can ask your question now. I see your hand is raised. We're gonna have about 5 more questions, and then we're gonna have there's a short snippet, a poem that one of our young people have prepared that we'd like to share. And then the launch of the anti-racism essay writing competition, which I think could perhaps be an important thing as young people to take forward. But in the close also, we'll speak to the how question and some of the reflections of where to from here. Bongi Nkosi.
Okay, thank you for giving me the
Bongi
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Okay, thanks for giving me the chance. My question is around education, and it's for all the panelists. I wanted to ask, how can we make sure that the education that is being received in school is value-based, that it leads to a job? Because, I mean, we know that we often tell young people that you need to get an education so that you can get a job. But at the same time, there is millions of people with an education but without jobs. And then, so what I'm asking is, how can we make sure that it's not just a thing that we say, but it's a lived reality, that when you get an education, it leads to a job, and that you don't have to risk you before you get a job, but you've been in school for more than 15 years.
Cool. Thank you so much. I love that question. Who of our panelists would like to answer that one? Which of our panelists would like to do that? I know, Crystal, are you still with us? I think speaking into unemployment and
yes,
that.
I am still here. I didn't want to answer because Bongi Nkosi is actually one of our influencers, and so you might have heard me say some stuff already. So I was waiting to see if any of the other panelists were gonna chime in. But I do have something to say.
I might have 2 minutes to add.
Yeah, maybe somebody will pipe in with a different speech other than my one. But just to say that I think a lot of the problems with education is our curriculum doesn't reflect the world in which we live. We keep saying that there's a skills mismatch between, people go and they say, I studied at a TVET, but then I can't find a job. The reason is that what's offered at a TVET isn't reflective of what industry needs are. So one of the practical things that we're putting forward as Youth Capital is to say that the private sector and employers really need to partner with schools in community and start, giving talks, partnering with them around using the life orientation lesson, which I think is such a wasted opportunity in the syllabus to teach young people real life skills, like filling in a tax form, for example, or opening a bank account, simple things like that. We have people who go through 12 years of education and don't know how to do these things that as an adult you're going to need to do. And so one of our calls is that employers start partnering with schools in their communities a little more closely to provide that. And then obviously a longer term policy change is to look at the curriculum and say, is it reflective of the world in which we live? We've been saying during COVID-19 now that for a long time, there's been a lot of pressure to say our curriculum, it's too full. There's a lot of stuff that's actually not relevant and not needed. We could slim the curriculum down and take the pressure off teachers and learners. And COVID-19 presents us with a unique opportunity to do that, to say, what do we really need? And are young people at a disadvantage if we cut out some, really outdated history or geography that isn't relevant for a South African context in 2020? So those are some of the practical things that we're putting forward. And obviously a curriculum change is a huge task. It's not going to happen overnight. But to Bongi's point, we really need to say, are we preparing young people for the world of work? And the answer is no, we aren't. So something needs to change.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bayanda, I give you a minute to respond as well.
Okay. Thank you so much. I can even leave my email address in the comment section for me to share this document that I'm going to talk about. So the DBE introduced to what is called the 3-tier system, right? And it's to address this issue about is education making sure that one is going to get an employment after. And what basically this system says, it says that let's divide the education system into 3 streams, right? One stream is academic. Second stream is to technical, vocational. One other stream is technical, occupational. And you can read about the plans that they want to have with this. And this is a whole revolution, right, of a new system that we know currently that they can't even now in this one make sure that we have the equal and the best education ever. So it's going to take time. So my straight answer to you is that the education is not preparing for one to really get a good job or to get a job immediately. But I think what we need to do is to engage with the current policies that the government is starting to develop, like the 3-tier system policies, like the policies that they want to, young people to start considering and start commenting and start submitting our own experience to those policies so that we can influence those decisions.
Thank you so much. I think for me as well, as I qualified as an educator, I'm still pursuing my postgrad in education, and I've always had a passion for education, not as I think it's more so from my experiences and having dealt with young people who have received a very poor quality education. And I think there's huge questions we have to continuously ask ourselves. You raised curriculum, you've raised policy. I think it's also just the mode of teaching has also been outdated. Young teachers, are they equipped? Do they understand governance or government? I know many of us here are also still grappling with how does government work? How do we access government and so on, which isn't necessarily really taught at school effectively. Some schools might have great programs for active citizenship, while others might not. We can continue the question of education, but I know Tato has asked a really interesting one to Moteo, who says, does he think that that thinking of the youth as a unified political category useful? Because you say that you see young people in positions of power who hold views that inevitably harm the youth. In short, is youth a useful indicator of social and political interest? Moteo, over to you.
Sheesh, I think that's a really interesting question, and one that might require further engagement and sort of further thinking. But my sort of knee-jerk reaction to that would be, I think there's definitely issues that affect us as youth by virtue of us being youth. Issues such as unemployment, because we know the youth are disproportionately in relation to all other age groupings, highly unemployed. But also, when you look at education systems, we know that these affect the youth in particular, also disproportionately. And so I think in terms of organizing and in terms of mobilizing, there are those things that affect us across the political, irrespective of what your political ideology is. There are those issues that affect us and that should bring us together in terms of challenging and bringing about change for those particular issues. But I think, you know, there's a higher standard for those that we elect to represent us as the youth. On that level, there must be a deeper sort of interrogation of what are the views that you as a leader hold, and do those views of you as a leader, do they align with mine as your constituency? So in short, there are useful similarities, commonalities amongst all of us as youth. And I think it is useful, especially if we want to mobilize and we want to create change. It is useful for us to band together for these issues that affect us.
Thanks so much, Matteo. I will take those hands, but before that, there's two things that I think should be opposed here to the session. One is the idea around volunteership, and is there a lack of opportunity for young people to access spaces where they can carry out activism work? And then the flip side, we have a question about performance activism. So we exposed someone saying that we are exposed to performance activists, and how do you deal and recognize this type of activism? So Courtney, you had a hand. Perhaps you can respond, but also touch on some of these points that I've raised.
Sure. Thanks, Irfan. This discussion is really amazing. I do have to say that. The two questions that I want to address are, I think it might have gotten lost, but there was a question about social media and the use of social media, and does it create a disconnect between what's happening on the ground and what's happening on social media? And one thing I have to say is that activism changes, right? Your strategies and your tactics change. And social media inherently, it's not inherently a bad thing. Yes, it may be used for bad things, but that also means that we can use it in our movements. I mean, those who are involved in Fees Must Fall, you will remember that we had entire marches planned on WhatsApp, planned in one WhatsApp group. The thing with social media is that it makes everything fast-paced, and it makes us, it molds us into activists who are able to adapt. So you'd have a WhatsApp group and you'd say, okay, meeting point here, the meeting point gets leaked to Twitter, you quickly change. So that was how we use social media. And I think to a certain extent it was effective. Yes, it does present limitations, it presents issues, but I think that if social media is used in the correct way, I mean, we would not know about Black Lives Matter, we would not know about George Floyd, if we wouldn't know about Uyinene if there wasn't social media, if there wasn't social media outcry on that. But having said that, it has to be paired with on the ground work. It has to, we can't throw away the door-to-door canvassing. We can't throw away the standing on the road, giving out pamphlets. We still have to do that individual work. But social media is a tool that we have, why not use it? I don't think it should be painted in a negative light. I think all of us here we are pretty active on our social media in supporting the things that we are part of. And then the issue of volunteerism, I think that's a very interesting one. Look, activism fundamentally is about personal sacrifice. And I think a lot of people, especially those of us who started when we were, in high school, we gave up a lot of our personal time to help create change. But I think this is where the issue of mental health has to come in. So if that volunteerism is then impacting on your mental health and your ability to have, a life, have a childhood, I think that's where the limit is. And I think also I think the question was also around, we have bills to pay. How do we still be activists, but also pay our bills? And I think the first thing is that the reason that often young people are taken advantage of in these spaces is because our work is not valued as being valuable in itself. Our work is valued as being the token youth. So you have to be at this event all day, you'll have one opportunity to speak, but you're there as the face of the youth. And I think that's what needs to stop. And that's the part of activism that we need to leave behind. But the part about needing to pay bills, I think that there's so many different forms of activism. So, we understand, and to a certain extent for a lot of us, to be able to give up an entire day and sit on the internet and do this rally is a privilege. Not many people can do that. The fact that some of us could take a day off school to go to a protest, that is a privilege. Those of us who have that privilege must use that privilege. And those of us who maybe can't, can support in other ways. You can support in emotional support, mental support. You can retweet. You can join. You can join in your own capacity. So I think also this pressure to be an activist, to make change, I think also needs to be lifted, because youth, we do have our own issues that we also need to deal with, personally and financially, and I don't think that should be seen as being selfish. I think that's valid. I think Bayanda also wanted to speak about mental health, so I'll leave, and social media, so I'll leave that for him.
I'll give you the hand now, Bayanda. I think just to add on, we're living in an ever-changing world. So I agree with Court in saying that social media is very impactful. It's important, but it has to be complemented by some form of practical action. And perhaps in the end of the session, I'd like to put forward one of my solutions is that, the Kathrada Foundation has these youth clubs, and I see a lot of young people here who are part of those youth clubs who have done amazing work, and they don't give themselves enough credit for the work they've done. Whether it's the sports days they've hosted in their areas, or the pickets or issues around gender-based violence, they themselves coordinated and worked as a group, and they managed to get something done. And I think a lot of the issues we speak of at a broad space come down to a local level and affect people's lives in a different way. So when we say grassroots, it's not that you need to be going out on a daily basis to work and 12-hour shift, whatever type of thing. It means that you link up with other young people in your area. You organize yourselves in a structured, semi-structured way, but in doing so, you give yourself tasks. You small things, whether it's looking out for some elderly people in your area, or trying to create a platform for other young people to have a safe space, that sort of thing. And I think that's where we're not understanding the organizing work that needs to go into this. Bayanda, before I come to you, there's a hand, and then I'm going to come to you, and then we're going to go into Mondli. Mondli has his hand up, but he'd also like to share a poem that he has prepared for today. So Azra, you had a hand up.
Hi, thank you, Irfan. So my question is also related to the social media and performance activism type thing. And while I agree with Courtney that it definitely has to be complemented with actual groundwork, I think that a lot of the time activism on social media, people get a form of satisfaction from just posting something, like just posting a black square. And not to sound cynical, while that is helpful and it does help raise awareness, if it's not translating to anything, then it kind of defeats the purpose. So how do you actually translate social media activism so that you can actually catalyze change?
For sure. And I something for me that I've been thinking about is how powerful, I think it was 2 weeks ago, where people were calling out abusers and people who are known as rapists and so on social media. And this was like a wow, this person is doing this, and people were actually actively taking forward a movement that hasn't been really given attention to. And I think there's those practical movements and those practical changes that can happen on social media. But I agree, on the flip side, you know, you can't just have posting a blog to feel good for yourself. And I think awareness is activism has to be broken up into the many different things, but advocacy and that sort of work requires you as an individual to utilize your space and your energy to do something more than just your social media. Bayanda, you had a comment here, and I'd like you to share some of what you wanted to.
Thank you so much. You know I'm very big on social media, and I I'm literally just was looking for a tweet that I tweeted this week where I said this was based on gender-based violence per se, and I don't think we mentioned gender-based violence right now, which is in the hype now of Twitter. And this was based on gender-based violence, where many celebrities and many people, and specifically men, who said, "Man, you need to do better." And that was the Twitter. And my argument with that was to say that that is not enough. For me, I take that as nonsense just to say you need to do better, while you know that when your mates are slut shaming, women, you don't say anything. When you don't protect women who get robbed in front of you, when you don't, protect women when they are being sexually harassed on the grounds, at work, at school, everywhere. So for me, that holds no water. For you to say that we need to do better is not as effective as to say that I am calling out Mayanda, who's doing A, B, and C on this woman. I can call police at this time. So more than anything, we can tweet all we like, we can do all we want. The difference about tweeting because something is trending and tweeting for advocacy is different. There's a huge difference. For people who are advocates, speakers, they always want to hold people accountable. That's number one. You tweet so that you can hold people accountable, right? You direct your message to the people accountable. We've seen people tweeting straight to the Department of Education, to the South African police and so on, because they're not afraid of holding those departments accountable and for them to answer to the people. So I want people to know that there's a difference between just tweeting because something is trending, and there's a difference between tweeting so that you can get accountability, so that people can answer to the people. So for me, that is also it has a lot to do with performance activism, where you just want to do things so that, you can satisfy your own ego of just being fame, of getting likes or anything like that. But advocacy is about holding people accountable and making sure that you don't back down until you get answers for something. And people should start tweeting about that. And I wanted to just chip in about this mental health. When you are a volunteer and you are working for an NGO, often we often overlooked the psychological impact that young people that work for NGOs in South Africa go through. Everybody expects us to know their rights. Everybody expects us to get it right. And the truth is that we are not getting it right sometimes. And we need to be called out as well. And we need to be held accountable as well. So this is me edging that the people that work for NGOs that are fighting for social justice are not always getting it right. We also need to call them out when they do performance activism. We also need to call them out when they are doing injustice to societies and to people. If we know people that are, they're not doing justice and they work for an NGO, call them out. Let's not assume that you work for an NGO and that already automatically makes you, a savior, or, that's not the truth.
Thank you so much, Bayanda. I know two of the speakers do want to contribute now, Busisiwe and Mateo, but can I ask that I allow the poem to take place and our anti-racism winners to speak, and then at the end, you guys can conclude the discussion with your contributions. And I know I've noticed 2 or 3 questions that weren't answered. So if you do, if you can, in the meantime, just look through some of them. I know one was about education and arts education, and how we as educators and approach it within schools, because I think it's powerful that we use art, not just, painting and so on, but in things like drama and so on that can be used quite effectively. We're trying to explore how we use sort of, the theater, it's called, what is it called? Guerrilla theater as they did back in the day. And those people with those skill sets can make a huge impact if we do that grassroots work at that level. So Mondli, are you with us? Mondli? Okay, it seems like he hasn't been here. So we do have one poem that I'd like to show that was prepared by Sinalo, who is from our youth club in Loli. So please have a listen.
Mzansi Afrika ifestile yamathuba umnyama weyantlukwana umhlaba apho wonke ubani usele ekhululekile kodwa inkululeko ifunyanwa ngantoni amaxhoba kwimeko singathanga sawadala ikunyanzelwa kwigazi singathanga salicima okanye salihlaziya kodwa asingomabanjwa kwixesha lidlulileyo endaweni yonke sijonge kwikamva kwaye sishiya uthuli kwakuthulekile sawafumana amazwi ethu sicinga ukuba noxolo kunoba bangashiya ilizwe lethu lizinceba sabubona ubuhle bemphefumlo yethu nokuba umbala wezikhumba zethu sasiyazi siyimbewu yabantu abaseleyo kwaye siyokwenza babone ukuba amandla asemandleni impumelelo yazibudala kwaye asikulungelanga ukuba nomsindo ebantwini abasenza sava ubuhlungu sibuyisela uthando endaweni yoko.
Thank you so much, Sinalo, for that. I know you were with us a moment ago. We will post this on our social media in case anyone didn't catch it properly because of the background sounds, but it's a really powerful poem. Mondli, I'm not sure if he's with us anymore, but we'd like to take forward this discussion into the launch of the 2020 anti-racism essay writing competition. And we have with us Jaden and Mbali, who were two winners last year. Jaden, perhaps you can introduce yourself and your reflections on racism. And after that, we can have Mbali also join us and we showcase the new topics for the year. And we try as many as possible to try to get you guys as young, or not you guys, but all of you young people to perhaps write an essay on any of the topics and submit that through and share that with your networks because there's some awesome prizes to be won. Jaden, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Irfan. Thanks for having me, and thank you to all the wonderful speakers and contributions for the past 2 hours. So what I usually do on Youth Day is sort of sit with memory and memory as it is experienced outside of the body and within the body, how that past, how many speakers have spoken about how the revolution is both the past and the future, and how we remember that past and how it's what we are experiencing now is in direct conversation with the struggles of 1976 and the entire activist struggle during apartheid. So we see the conversations and the struggles also interconnected globally, and how our experiences here in South Africa with police brutality is in direct conversation with the experiences of police brutality worldwide. How our conversations about prison abolition is directly in conversation with how we address gender-based violence in this country. So what in my professional or in my daily life in academia, we've obviously gone through Fees Must Fall and Roads Must Fall, and again we're seeing those conversations spark up globally in a moment that everybody has watched, or not everybody has watched, but that has really scarred the screens with the death of George Floyd, we have sort of a mirror effect of what happened with the photograph of Hector Peterson and Buisa and Antoinette Sithole, and how even there we see how the world cannot ignore the horrors that are happening. It's such a strange thing to think about, that if these videos weren't taken, if these pictures weren't taken, what the world would look like. And so I spend today thinking about that and about how important it is that we remain vocal in telling the truth and showing the truth. And I think part of that is writing, which is what the essay competition really inspires, especially in the youth, and writing about our stories, which can often slip through the cracks because there's often not enough platform for the youth. So writing and expressing our stories through words is also a form of activism and a form of showing the world our stories, no matter how small, they are important. So yeah, that's usually what my experience is of today, and it always sort of continues the ideas of remembering the history of this country and how we experience the world today and what we can do to further that struggle.
Thank you so much, Jaden. I think powerful words that you've shared. Writing is a form of activism, and we don't do it enough. Mbali, are you with us still? There she is.
Hi. Hi, everyone. My name is Balentle. And last year, I had the wonderful opportunity of writing about racism in South African schools. So I have had the wonderful experience of changing high schools 3 times. And last year, I was in matric. And when I saw the essay competition on Twitter, I was like, I should use this as an opportunity to reflect on everything that I've experienced over the years in terms of racial inclusion, exclusion, and the racism that happens in private schools, which is something that has been on social media a lot over this past week. So having reflected, one of the main reasons why over the years I failed to actually articulate properly was because having been in this position of receiving an education with like a diverse community of students and being able to study with people of different races, it's like I am surely not in a position to complain, right? But looking at all of this, it's like in our education system, we finally have diversity, but we don't have a creation of a space where the opportunities were presented, where we have the sufficient support to utilize them to the maximum potential. So in my essay about that, I then spoke about the marginalization of how, as a Black female, I'm in the computer science field, but even in high school, having to work twice as hard as the white children to be seen as half as good most of the time, to receive that recognition. And also going into a space where there's so much prejudice in the system, to the point where to feel almost included and accepted, it's almost a process of whitewashing yourself to feel as though you're included in that space or to feel recognized in everything. So I really appreciated what Bayanda spoke about the mental and psychological component, because that's not really covered and spoken about. And even in this year, I was in the middle of getting through my first year before I had to come back home, but I attend the University of Stellenbosch, and many people know about the historical context of Stellenbosch University, and it is very much white and a lot of Afrikaans speak people, and Afrikaans is the standard there. So when we came, it was very, it's surprising to see how the ignorance still exists, how people don't understand the importance of not just taking up space, but feeling included and feeling like I'm in a space where I'm actually growing mentally, emotionally, and I feel welcome. And within the space, I was lucky to come into first year where we have a very diverse and inclusive welcoming committee who had us start the conversations and speak about how exactly the privilege that white people have at the institution can be used to be more inclusive to people of color. So yeah, I'm just very grateful to the foundation for even the trip to Robben Island, and it's really just brought so much more meaning and made Youth Day and everything more real. And I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mbali. I think your experiences also have changed from last year. The fact that you got to university and you also had a lot more well, you faced a different kind of institutionalized racism perhaps, and it would be maybe good to hear from you again, writing again on those experiences. So the foundation deals with anti-racism work. We have an anti-racism department, and each year we host this annual essay writing competition. This year, the topics will be shared publicly on our social media. But for those who are here, you have the first view of these topics. And I think it does link to some of the experiences and that have been currently going on in the country and around the world. So the topics are highlighted here. Time to put racism on a permanent lockdown, racism, the greatest virus of our time, and schools, places of racism without racists, ? We've seen, as Mbali says, a rise in especially the private sector schooling where racism still exists, and whether it's through policy or whether it's bias or people, or teachers who enact this kind of behavior. In Cape Town recently, there was a teacher that was said learners should design a post about slavery, and just like understanding how this exists today is a real phenomenon. So the requirements: be between the ages of 15 and 21, choose any of the topics above, a minimum of 1,000 words or 1,004, maximum of 1,400. So it's pretty short, especially for those who are students at university. Essay should be in any one of the South African official languages. So you're welcome to write in any of those languages. Only one essay will be accepted per entrant. So, only one topic, one essay will be accepted. Plagiarism will not be tolerated, so that will be checked. Prizes, some really cool ones. Just for 1,400 words, you could possibly win 2,000 Rand cash plus a laptop. Second place, 1,000 Rand cash and a laptop. Third place, 500 Rand cash and a laptop. Please submit the essays by the 31st of July this year to the youth@kathradafoundation.org or PO Box 3240 Lenasia. The number is there, and I will be sharing this on the Facebook page later, the Facebook and Twitter page later. So if anybody does want to get it from there, you're welcome to do that. Yeah, so that is the anti-racism essay writing competition. Jaden spoke quite profoundly in saying that it's a form of activism. Earlier today, we hosted two online virtual book launches of two people. One was a poetry collection, the other was about the struggle in a particular town in South Africa. And one of the authors, it stuck with me, is to say, if the lion does not learn to write, the hunter will always be glorified. And that actually stuck with me this whole morning, in fact, because if we're not going to be able to write our stories, write our histories, and put and get our voices out there, we're not going to be able to reap the benefits of that. Our activism, the way we go about things, will die down. It's not going to be as effective as we'd like. So if for those that are keen to write, please do write. And it doesn't, this is just the competition we're speaking about, but there's a whole range of things you could write on. Perhaps this rally as well. What we'd also like is if you could share reflections and tag us so that we can share this on our spaces as well on Youth Day and what it means to you. There are questions in the chat room, and I know some of the young people do still want to ask questions. So I will also leave my email and my contact details if any of you would like to contact me from the Kathrada Foundation. And if any of the panelists are interested in leaving their, I don't know if it's social media handles or email. I know Fasia has indicated that questions that she would like to address will be done afterwards on her social media Instagram page. So that'll be a cool thing to look out for if anyone wants to do that. But we want to draw a close to the session, and I think it for me it's been profound. It's lots of learning and just being able to share a platform with so many young people is amazing. I want to ask the panelists to in your closing remarks as to how we take forward the fight as young people. And you know, the tagline of this youth rally was rising through adversity, and we're living through a pandemic, we're living through economic crisis, we're living through climate crisis. Someone did mention earlier that there's so many things going on, but what we do about it will be what matters most. So maybe in closing, share with us, how do we take this forward from here on? So I know, Mateo, you had your hand up, and Busisiwe. So in that order, you guys, well, yeah, Mateo, you first.
Thanks, Irfan. So I think my hand was up to comment on the social media conversation that happened earlier. And I think, you know, but in closing, the nice thing about social media is that it's brought a lot more people into the conversation, conversations that would take us much longer to get into the public domain. And so, you know, we should continue to use that medium for mobilization, for advocacy, and for informing people. And there was some discussion about, you know, people that use performative activism. In the same breath, I think it's an opportunity for us as activists. Many of us feel very protective of, because of the hard work that goes into it and because of the sacrifice that goes into it. Many of us feel protective of this line of work. But I do feel that it's also upon us to reach out to people that we might view as being performative activists and bring them into the organization, bring them into the conversation, bring them you know, into the work that you're doing and get more soldiers for the cause. So there is an opportunity for mobilization from social media. We know that our society, you know, we have the memory of goldfish. When one thing happens, we all focus on this for 2 days, and then it's life as normal in the following weeks. So we really do need to make use of that. But I do think, you know, moving forward, we need to start going on the ground. We need to start mobilizing. I think if all of us, as if everyone that's watching could adopt one issue that they'd like to champion, and you know, if on your social media, if you can post about that, inform people about that issue that you've adopted. It can be from the conversation that we've had today or another issue that you've identified somewhere. Tweet about it, Facebook about it, volunteer at an organization that deals with that issue. Speak to your family members about it, speak to your close circle of friends about it. And there's a variety of issues to choose from, man. I mean, we know it was touched on that we have high rates of GBV, and the past few weeks have been horrific if you've been on social media. The education space always needs more activists on the ground who are willing to pick up the fight. And so, yeah, in closing, we'll meet somewhere on the ground.
Thank you so much, Com. Always great hearing from you. And if anybody does want to contact you, I think, I'm not sure if you have left a contact email or perhaps your socials, but even through the Section 27 tags, you can get through to that organization who are doing phenomenal work across the board. Next up, Fasia, I know you're going to be speaking later on your Insta, so maybe you could just close off for the session now.
Yeah, thanks, Irfan. Yeah, I wanted to do that because there's lots of questions And there's never enough time on a platform like this to really delve into it. And what I think we need to also create is a space in which public reps are way more accessible than in the past. So I want to be a lot more accessible, especially to young people. But I think just quickly closing remarks, and it follows on from what Mateo was saying. You can see Mateo and I think alike and have worked together in the past. But I said it earlier, we need a lot more community organizing, grassroots organizing. And in many ways, everybody can do something. A lot of people think that this activism thing, not everybody is into mainstream politics or partisan politics, and that's fine. But everyone can find a way to contribute. And I say this all the time, and I will continue to say it. If you are passionate about something, find a way to make that a part of your community. Even if you do smaller stuff like volunteering over the weekend in a community food garden, in a shelter, in a school, whatever the case may be, there are things that we can do. So there's a real need for us to think more collectively and not as an individual. No longer what can I do for me to make me better or me look better, but what can I do to benefit society? And I think just the last thing, everybody has a different pathway to activism. And if that pathway starts through social media, through necessarily, if posting this black square is step one to you being an activist, then maybe, there's some benefit to it. I think I agree with Mateo. We are very protective, and sometimes it can lead into some elitist kind of activism, and we need to also open up the space and say, well, even if that's your way through, that's okay, because as long as something positive is coming from it, and as long as this leads to more tangible organizing, more tangible results, then in reality it served its purpose. So I'm looking forward to continuing the discussion, and thank you to AKF for always providing a safe space for us to talk about these issues.
Thanks, Honorable Fass. Always great hearing from you as well. Dr. Shakira has left, but she has thanked everyone. You can also catch her on her social media if you'd like. We have Busisiwe Nkosi, anti-racism manager of the Kathrada Foundation and coordinator of the Anti-Racism Network of South Africa. I know she was meant to speak earlier, and I think it's just a technical thing because I'm not seeing her hand function. But Busisiwe, over to you in your closing remarks.
Thank you, Irfan. I think for me, in closing, I'd say that today is we reflect and remember, we must also rethink and reform our everyday systems of injustice in pursuing our equitable and sustainable future. But also we need to start in our own spaces enforcing change. And we also need to link social media campaigns to the work that we're doing on the ground to make social media more effective and use social media as a tool in fighting inequality and racism. Thank you.
Mandla. Thank you so much, Busi. I'll chat to you soon. We have Bayanda as well. But Bayanda, any closing remarks? You're muted. Yeah.
I think for me, just to echo what other panelists have said, in summary, I think that we need to view every struggle, even if we choose one thing that we want to dedicate and we want to advocate about, we need to view every struggle with an intersectional lens. And I often say this because we often overlook any other struggle compared to the one that you're so passionate about. And I think it's very important for young people to start looking at every struggle with an intersectional lens and see what are the linkages. With that, collaboration is going to happen. Support is going to happen. Systems, developing systems and developing policies and actually sharing of information is going to happen. So that's what I want to say. Let's start being more intersectional and view everything with an intersectional lens.
Thank you so much, Bayanda. I fully agree. And I think one of the reflections I had over the last few weeks was surprising but not unfounded, was that people were saying Black Lives Matter, but why are you bringing up Palestine, or but what aboutism, all of that stuff that have come about. And I think it's important for us also to look at how we build our content, how we build our understanding of these issues, and see the connection that lie between them all. Courtney, any last words?
Sure, of course, agree with all of the speakers. But for me, I really think it's time that we link our struggles. I understand that everyone has their own their own focus. But I really think that we are just going to continue to make have these small victories in these siloed sectors without a mass movement. So I think that it really is time that the youth and everyone really bands together for a proper mass movement for transformative change, systemic change. Obviously, me being very biased, I'm going to say that climate justice is really an opportunity to link struggles. Climate justice is a deeply feminist, deeply anti-racist, deeply anti-capitalist fight. And, it's not just about climate change. It really is about social justice. So I think we all just need to have more discussions like this. And again, thank you to AKF for hosting this, because we need to be talking to each other way more and finding each other. We need to be finding each other in the struggle. So yeah.
Thank you, Coates. Always great hearing from you, my comrade. Crystal, you are the last speaker that would like, please could you share your last reflections and words with us? And then before closing, I'd like to end this session.
Thanks, Irfan, and thanks to everybody for a really rich and engaging session that I think has really just shown the diversity of young people and the struggles that we face, and that everybody really wants to take an active role. And I think sometimes the problems can feel overwhelming. So for us, I know unemployment, literally millions of young people just without work, with not in study, and it can feel really overwhelming. And so that's why we're at Youth Capital are saying, here's a 10-point action plan. We've got steps from the big to the small, and at Youth Capital, we're really going to endeavor to tie it all together at a policy level. And so I think, to agree with what everybody else has said, to feel that you can take a step no matter how small and know that that step has impact is important. And then, as I said at the beginning, to get the non-youth of South Africa to really support young people in their struggles is going to be key. I've put all of our info on the Zoom chat, but you can get us on all of the socials at Youth Capital SA, and youthcapital.co.za is our website, also with our WhatsApp line. So feel free to get in touch with us there. And thanks again to the Foundation for organizing such an awesome chat and for the invite.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Crystal. Okay, so we've reached a point where, it's a sad point for me, because after, all this work and all this engagement, it has to come to an end. But this isn't the end. And I think for all of us, it's to take forward the work we're doing to bring in more people. And what I found nice in the last few weeks was that you saw the activists on social media saying, okay, but you weren't just like attacking people as much as other general people were doing. And I think there's an important link there to say, bring in those people. If each one of us can bring in 2 more or 1 more person, we are able to create that mass movement that Courtney is talking about. That grassroots action takes work, it takes consistency. And I'm hoping that with us as well, through the foundation, with the youth clubs, we currently have 9 in the south of Johannesburg, and we're hoping to have more of these. And in the coming weeks, you'll see we'll put out the call for more youth clubs to be opened, but that will also be done obviously under the constraints that we have. But we're hoping that with more young people at the grassroots level, we can start filtering these discussions down to those young people. And it's a privilege for us to be here today, as many of you have said. And the work I've been doing has opened my eyes to the fact that we don't necessarily, we speak to each other, we speak on these platforms, or say on different media platforms, but we take for granted that young people on the ground aren't necessarily getting this information. They aren't necessarily engaging on this content. So for us to go to the ground is important. For us to take what we know and spread it further is important. Some of my nieces and nephews have asked, and I've been able to teach them a bit about social issues. But it's in those actions, as Busi says, it starts from us as at home, in our neighborhood. And it could be a small group as a neighborhood watch group that you start discussing things and taking things forward. As I said before, it's the 40th anniversary of the school boycott in the 1980s. And during that moment, it was students who led the fight. So many of us who have come through university, tertiary education, even schools, we are going to be leading this fight. We have to lead this fight. There's no one else going to be fighting for us but us. And it reminds me of a quote that, or rather a piece of writing that comes from Uncle Kathy's speech. And I use this book. There's a booklet we use if anybody would like. It's called Igniting Your Power. It's what we do. It's what we use in introducing the youth work at the foundation to other young people. And I'm going to end with this short passage. It reads, "To the youth of South Africa, the days ahead of us will be dark, and there will be many ups and downs in our struggle. It is for these dark days that we must prepare. For many a comrade might begin to feel disillusioned, hopeless, and helpless. Some will lose confidence in our struggle and will fall by the wayside. But you must always remember that the cause of freedom is just and invincible. There is no such thing as defeat. Remember that no struggle in any part of the world was won in the drawing rooms and conference tables. We must at all times know that, as with the struggles of all people, the main brunt will have to be borne by the youth. We expect you and each and every one of you to play your part in whatever way you do, sports, social, economic, and cultural. Remember the struggle." Ahmed Kathrada. This was a letter to the youth of South Africa after being banned in 1954. And it still resonates today because it's speaking directly to our issues. On that note, I'd like to thank all of you, the panelists, but more importantly, the participants who have joined in here and on Facebook. I think we've had close to 100 varying throughout the session that have come through. And it would be awesome to continue this engagement. You have my details, you have the other speakers' details. Let's move towards some more practical action. The foundation will continue to endeavor to create spaces for young people to engage, to speak about the issues that we have as a collective. And we know that it's not easy. These are hard conversations. People are often uncomfortable about them, but we have to create safe spaces for us to do this. And we will continue on that path as much as possible. So thank you all. It's been an awesome time. I've really thoroughly enjoyed it. And I know some of our young people have as well. So if you are going to be posting anything, please do tag us. We'd like to hear from you. And we're always open to listening and engaging with any of you. So thank you so much. It was awesome. And have a great Youth Day further. And I hope that we can continue the struggle as far and as wide as possible. Be safe, everyone.
Thank you.
I thought you might lead us out in song.
Actually.
In the beginning, Ging, I said that I was missing song, and it's something that I love because whenever I go, even at the office, I have to be dancing or singing. But these are strange times, and I don't think I have the voice for a virtual song, because people need to, the thing of rhythm, and that has to come in there. So on that note, thank you so much. Mateo, you're welcome to end in song if you'd like.
Cheers, comrades. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Irfan. It was excellent.
Thanks, Cobb. Are you going to do a song?
Well,
Thanks, Irfan. That was great. I'm going to go take a break before the next thing.